Good afternoon and welcome to the OR Today webinar series. We're excited to have over 560 registered attendees for today's webinar. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving an OR Today Live surprise pack to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. Today's sponsor, Healthmark, is headquartered in Michigan. Michigan borders how many of the 5 Great Lakes? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard. While you're answering, I want to remind you today's webinar is eligible for 1 continuing education hour. The post-webinar survey and certificate process are now automated, so the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you will receive about an hour after this webinar has finished. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately, and 1 lucky attendee will win an Amazon gift card for completing the survey. This webinar is also eligible for 1 credit for eShum and CBSPD. A separate email containing a link for this credit will be sent out by today's sponsor, Healthmark, during the next few days. Okay, and let's see who the winner of our OR Today surprise package is. And it is, where are we? I think Linda Clare. I think that's correct. Congratulations, Linda. The correct answer is 4. OR Today would like to thank our sponsor, Healthmark Industries. Since 1969, Healthmark Industries has developed and marketed innovative solutions to aid healthcare facilities in their delivery of surgical instruments and other life-saving medical devices to patients. Healthmark Industries' mission is to continue to innovate, continue to support and continue to serve the healthcare provider industry and support services that make it possible to deliver quality healthcare. Visit hmark.com for more information. Our presenters today are Sharon Rodeo and Seth Heaton, Clinical Education Coordinators at Healthmark Industries. Sharon, you may begin whenever you're ready.
All right, Linda, thank you very much. And Healthmark is definitely honored to be presenting this webinar in OR Today. And it'll be Seth and myself talking about CHIP tips. And really what this is about, it's about care and handling, inspection, and prevention for the sterile processing professionals. And all of these CHIP tips have either come through customer service through emails, text messages, through the website, auditing, phone calls, and a variety of stuff from customers. And we really wanted to share some of these questions that we do get in our travels and share all the latest and greatest too of some of the technology as well as the issues that we're finding. All right. So again, like Linda stated, that Seth, Hendy, and myself will be presenting today. We'll be taking basically the presentation in half because there is a lot to cover, and we wanted to focus again on some key, essential areas. Disclosures, we are a vendor, and we want to make sure that you understand that every part of this presentation is about education. And we will be showing a little tiny tidbits, per se, from an IFU, instructions for use, but it's your responsibility to make sure that you're reading the full instructions for use when you're using any type of instrumentation or medical devices. Our policy is basically our commitment to educating our customers and education in general, and you'll be seeing that through this whole presentation. The objective today is we're going to review sterile processing tips in the everyday tasks, and like I said earlier, it's kind of what we are kind of hearing from customers. Understand the importance of handling instrumentation and equipment within your department, as well as reinforcing the basic technical principles that are used in the sterile processing department itself. Understanding the impact that standards and guidelines have in properly functioning department that processes instrumentation and medical devices. So we have our first poll question, number 1. We will be having a few of these throughout the webinar. Who is attending today? Do we have SPD professionals, OR professionals, infection prevention professionals, and endoscopy professionals?
Okay, we'll just wait a few more seconds, Sharon, and I can give you. Okay, it looks like we've got a fair amount there, so I'm closing the poll. We we have 37% of SPTD professionals, 17% OR professionals, 24% infection prevention professionals, 9% endoscopic professionals, and 13% just professionals.
All right, well, thank you, Linda. So I'm really glad to hear that we have a wide variety of percentages attending this webinar. This will touch in all these areas, so I'm really happy to see that. So thank you, Linda, for that. The first thing that we really should start out with Seth and I is basically looking at all we do. We will not be touching every bit or point of this, but we will be covering specific areas. But again, this shows there's a lot involved and there's so many details, there's so many things to make sure that everything we're doing is definitely on point, and bottom line, it's going to be for our patient. CHIP tip number one. So CHIP tip number one is a question that we do get periodically is disinfection the same as cleaning? Well, no, it isn't. It's cleaning is a removable of all visible and non-visible and any other foreign material from the medical device being reprocessed. Disinfection destroys most recognized pathogenic microorganisms, but not necessarily all microbial forms such as your bacterial spores. If it is not clean, you will not have effective disinfection or sterilization. So I really want to stress that. And disinfection processes do not ensure the margin of safety associated with sterile processes. Must get it clean first before disinfection and sterilization. And again, focusing on that piece for sure. CHIP tip number two, does a user validate their process or is it verification? Who does what? Well, we do get this question quite a bit, and manufacturers actually are the ones that validate an instrument that can be reliably cleaned and sterilized and disinfected and therefore reusable. The user is they're responsible for verifying that cleaning and sterilization equipment is working and that in-hospital cleaning and sterilization methods are consistently being performed. CHIP tip number three might be new to everyone. And basically the question is, I test my leak tester every time I use it, but how do I really know if it's working? Or if I'm only hearing this hissing noise, is that effective? So I'm going to show you some videos here. You may not hear the volume of that, but I just want you to see the video before we go into this. So the first video is very typical of how you test. For an example, this leak tester. So you push the pin in, you hear a noise. But what we're finding is that in this video, when you hook up some type A pressure device, or actually to test the PSIs, we're noticing that the pressure PSI is not very high. And we're seeing that consistently across the country. So to continue with that, what we're finding is the faulty leak testers are definitely an infection control risk. And what we're finding, it's all over the place. Incorrect pressure output is a common repair issue. Basically, you push the button on the connector to hear this hissing noise each time it is used, but really it's really insufficient based on the IFU that actually tells you that. Checking the pressure on these pressure gauges, pressure basically will tell you if it's meeting that. For an example, in the Olympus IFU, in translation of what the numbers have in there, it will say 4.1 PSIs, or that number or less is really a failure. You're not getting enough pressure. And as you will all know, that if the scope isn't pressurized, either at all or just not enough, that means you may catch major leaks, but you may not catch minor leaks. And of course, really, if the unit or the accessories to the unit are not working properly, you're going to send that out for repair or to your own biomedical department. Now, right now, we're in the early preliminary studies. And right now, traveling across the country, there's a few of us doing this study. Already, we're finding that out of 13 pieces of equipment, that includes the unit and accessories, 11 of them are failing. So much so that a couple weeks when I tested at one facility, the lever or the little gauge didn't even move at all. And that was basically something they were using every day, every time. So they pulled out their backup, and the backup failed. So again, this is something that we're finding consistently, and this will be probably the first time you're hearing about this. But again, making sure that your units are properly functioned is a big issue. CHIP tip number 4, why must I test insulated devices? Well, we do get this one here and there, and basically it comes down to patient burns or patient safety with electrical strays and stray currents. The field of view of the surgical team is only one section of the device, usually the middle to the distal, and we really have to make sure you understand that when you're in the room as a scrub or a circulator, and the nurses can definitely contest to this, that you're only seeing about 18 to 20% of the screen. So if there's any strays outside of that view, you'll never know. There's many different types of insulated devices, and I want to make sure that we go over some of those, and we're not focusing just on laparoscopic, which has been kind of the trend with focusing on anything that's specifically laparoscopic based. So we're into our poll question number 2. How many of you perform insulation testing at your facility / department?
Okay, I'm going to close out the poll, Sharon. Okay, so you have 60% at yes and 40% at no.
So typically what we're finding is about that number. So we're looking at almost half and half. The reason why we ask this poll question so vaguely and in the beginning is you're going to learn that there's more to it. And hopefully after this presentation, webinar, that you'll go back and evaluate how you're testing and what you should be testing. These are 3 videos that are examples of some testing, and I'm so sorry if you're not able to hear this, but really the point is to show you that there's different types of instrumentation. The first video was a forceps. In this particular case, the forceps looked fine. There was nothing wrong with it visually. But when you tested it, it actually failed 2 different times on that forceps. In this particular facility, they weren't testing the forceps at all. The focus has always been on laparoscopic at this facility. So again, I want to stress that there's other types of insulated devices. Forceps are one of them. They could be in different divisions. They can be in your neuro department or neuro section. They can be in ENT and orthopedic. The middle one would be laparoscopic, which is generally what we see being tested. This one was actually pretty bad. This was more of a test to show an example of insulation testing, but as you can see, it's pretty obvious that it was almost like it was chewed up. What happened was this got stuck in the blades of the washer, and it actually damaged it pretty bad. The last video was something that we really don't see technicians doing in the department, which is testing the bipolar, monopolar reusable cords that are in their laparoscopic trays and robotics or whatever it may be. So this is another area definitely that can be improved on, and I will show you some accessories that could help with that. So let's get into the insulation testing itself. So insulation is a temporary coating, and it retains the electrical current within the instrument. What I want to stress here is that there's one more word to add to it. It's not only temporary, it's very delicate, very delicate. Defects must be discovered during laparoscopic instrument set assembly, or depending on the type of insulation test that you may have. You could have sterile ones that are actually being done or checked prior to the procedure. And of course, this depends on your hospital policy and procedure if you are using those. But again, we're going to go through a handful of what's out in the market. Electricity can escape through these holes, causing burns, infections, and an extended recovery time. And really, the smaller the leak, the worse the burn, because it basically concentrates on that stray. So if you think about it, it's almost like a water hose. And if you were to take that water hose and kink it or cover it with your thumb, it's sort of, that's how it would be. So just because it's a smaller nick or little pinhole, it doesn't mean it's not going to do much. It's actually going to be worse than something would be like comparing it to a gash. The IFU of the device may state you need to test every time, and examples of the IFUs for insulated devices we're actually going to go over on the next few slides, because I thought it was important to kind of see what the IFUs are saying out there now. So some examples of IFUs, I chose a handful, and the first one I picked was spectrum laparoscopic instrumentation. And what's really interesting, it says in here, important note, at this point in the process, Spectrum recommends testing the insulation for cracks, gaps, where the shaft meets the tip at the assembly, and of course pinholes. So in this IFU, it does actually go into a little bit more detail of what you should be looking for based on damage. The ASSI bipolar scissor, this one says it recommends establishing a procedural review by which the instrumentation are inspected frequently before and after each use for damage such as, and it actually had some bullets, and on bullet 3 it said for insulated instruments, cracks, nicks, lacerations or abrasions in the insulation. So here, again, another example of describing what the damage you should be looking for. The V. Mueller Care Fusion bipolar jeweler's insulated forceps states that prior to use, inspect devices to ensure proper function and condition. Do not use these devices basically if they're not satisfactory and perform in their function or if they have any physical damage. So really what I want to stress on this slide here is making sure that you're looking at the full IFU. Again, these are just examples or pieces that I got out of these particular ones, but again, looking at the whole IFU or instructions for use. There is many types and models to use for testing the insulation. Again, the best thing that I've done in my past and even currently is going to huge vendor exhibits when you're out in international national conferences or chapter seminars, and you'll find a lot of different ones that are out there. And it's all like shopping, right? You want to look for the right one and what will meet your needs. But you just have to understand that some insulated testing units may not be purchased unless you go through the repair service for that vendor and that is established. It's not a bad thing, but just understand when you go and look at that, you may not be able to purchase it outright. You may have to look at the whole thing for repairs and a contract with that. And you do see that. Some repair vendors may provide an insulated tester to the customer at no cost, but make sure the tester meets your instrument and device inventory, as well as your staff needs on what has been discussed so far. So meaning that you want to make sure that your inventory, and that's the main message I want you to get out of this, is how you pick an insulated insulation tester and accessories is based on your instrumentation and device needs or your inventory. So for an example, you wouldn't just purchase a unit that tests just laparoscopic when you deal with robotics, insulated forceps and scissors, and even cords. So again, that's how you're selecting that. Also, the installation tester might need PMs. So what does that look like on the preventive maintenance? Is it something that's yearly? Does it have to have a yearly calibration? Does the tester need to be sent back to the vendor for the maintenance piece of it? And if so, do they provide a loaner? Or does it just go to your biomedical department? So again, some questions to ask. I like this. I think I got this on social media somewhere, but it's like watching a coworker test lab instruments without wearing gloves. I think we've all done this at one point. I've done it numerous times. But one thing to consider is what does the IFU state for the tester in regards to wearing gloves when you're performing that testing on your insulated devices. So again, I thought this was funny, but it doesn't hurt that bad. But again, it does definitely hurt just a tad. So what accessories does the tester provide? And this is another huge piece of it, because once you get to that point of, okay, I think we want to go with this tester based on what we have, can you really test your instruments and devices to your inventory? So these are examples, as you see in the top one there, it's a wand. The middle one is a fixed unit or fixed accessory to where the accessories are actually on the unit. The bottom right will be another variety of accessories, and of course on the bottom of the slide there. Now, what is included in the kit or package is one question you need to ask. What's included with that? And what additional accessories will I have to be purchased separately? How to identify damage of the accessories themselves. So I'm already finding, and I know Seth has, is damage to the accessories themselves. So for an example, on the right-hand side in those pictures, the top attachment 1, I've seen damage to where it's supposed to be fixed on the top and not move. I actually seen it where they spin because it's worn down. I've seen the brush on the test attachment 2 where it's completely worn down where you really can't use it. On the bottom there, where you see like a fixed block with the round piece, which we'll go into, it's basically damaged on the outside from being dropped, or even the most damage I see throughout is going to be your grounding wire or your attach, to where I'm seeing technicians tape it, which is very, very unsafe, and you do not want to do that. So again, just some examples of that. How are accessories replaced? So let's say you do find damage. How do you replace them if they are? Are they free? Do they get repaired? Or is there a cost associated with that with your vendor? Now, another question to ask is, will education in-service be provided by the vendor? Are the IFUs accessible? What if they're lost? Are they available online in a CD, on paper, or all three? So again, education is essential because you want to make sure you're using the equipment according to the IFU, as well as how to use the accessories. So again, let's go to accessories. Now, what and how are they used? Now, do the accessories have multiple uses? It could be used on one type of instruments and maybe on another. Are they user-friendly? I think user-friendly is a good question to ask, because if they're not user-friendly and they're very hard to use or very cumbersome, then you're not going to really get compliance with the technicians when you have those available. Is it a accessory that could be used with 2 hands versus 1 hand? Because typically when you have something that's used with 2 hands, you do have the chances of being shocked versus 1 hand. Are there multiple ways, again, to use those accessories? I think that is, again, stressing the importance of that, because if you have accessories that can be used for multiple instruments, a fixed block, like you can see there where I circled that, I think that's great, because then you can use the accessories in the block one way, or you can use the accessories outside of that block and attach to the unit itself. So again, a lot of questions to ask when you're shopping. Damaged accessories. Here's a good example. These pictures I took not that long ago, where if you see the picture on the top, the left to the right, the one on the left was their accessory that they were using, and the one on the right was mine from a brand new package. As you can see, it's worn down a lot. So in this case, what was happening is they were using them for all the laparoscopic, but they started getting into testing the robotics. When they started testing for the robotics, it was a lot bigger diameter, and it was actually wearing down that accessory. So again, that was fine. The problem is they were still using it for 3mm and 5mm laparoscopic, which it's not really going to be touching all the way. So you want to make sure that maybe you have multiple accessories of a certain kind to meet that need. On the bottom there, you can see what happened. They probably dropped it, but again, that's a safety hazard for you, because now you're exposing the inner parts of that accessory. So now let's get into who says what. So yeah, we kind of went over how to buy one, what the accessories, what to look for, but who says how or should I be testing? So let's start with AORN. AORN in 2018, in their statement, says care of instruments, insulated devices should be visually examined and tested using equipment designed to detect insulation failures. AAMI ST79 says there's actually no specific information on insulated items at this time, but do recommend visual inspection for defects of all instrumentation and devices. AST, so the scrub piece of this, American Society of Technicians, so if you look, surgical technologists, is basically saying insulation failures are now considered the primary cause of laparoscopic electrosurgical injuries. If the insulation is compromised, such as a crack or a hole, the electrical current can escape at the point and burn untargeted tissues. So they go really much in detail. The burn may not be seen by the surgical team like we talked about, but we'll go into a little bit more detail of the causes of symptoms that actually happen 3 to 4 days later. Again, AST goes on to say the following is a 5-step recommended method for inspecting the insulation in the CSSD. And I touched one, there's a few points here, but the one I focused on was a microscope should be use to visualize the integrity of the insulation of each item. I do want to point out that, yes, we're talking about insulated devices and testing, but we also, and using that tester, but we also want to make sure that you have the right magnification and lighting, and in this case, they're actually saying a microscope, to be able to see other damage. Because what we do see is damage, but not to the point where there's actually a complete breakthrough into the exposed metal. So that is still damage, even if the leak tester you're using does say it's passing. But any type of damage can harbor bacteria or just have bad patient outcomes. It goes on to say the insulation scanner should be used to detect the release of stray electrical energy along the length of the insulation, and then it goes on securely packaged for sterilization. So it actually goes into packaging when you go and put it back into the tray or set, and that would to minimize the movement, to have more damage on those devices even after you tested them. AAMI ANSI ST90 goes into your performance qualification, your PQ, and really goes into, you need to visually inspect for defects. You want to check for leakage, verifying integrity of the installation tester. The document is about quality, and it's a great document to look at consistently producing acceptable quality in those types of equipment, instruments, or devices. So again, another document saying such. Now there's many type, again, of accessories. Here's a picture I took of just an example of one, that the part on the left would be basically the package that you would get. But in my travels and looking and going to different types of vendor exhibits and such, I found a new one that came out for this particular one that actually tests your bipolar and monopolar cables, reusable cables. And all you do is you push the button from what I was able to play with, and it has 3 different diameters versus using a copper or that brush that more likely you won't get compliance with. But this was something that was really cool. Also, a bipolar forceps attachment where you basically put the prongs for the bipolar forceps, you plug it in, and then you do the testing with the brush instead of using 2 hands to do it. So again, just as some examples of in my travels of what I've seen. These videos here are just going over what I've seen. Again, on the picture, on the video on the left, you saw it's very close to the distal tip, and you can almost overlook that, thinking, oh, it's just the distal tip. But as you can see, it's not quite there. The other one is just an example of some of the testing that we've done. So I'm going to skim through these so we can give Seth some time to talk about his CHIP tips. But these are some examples that I see across the country. Here, they're separating. They're doing pretty good with this. Not all the way. You do have some metal instruments with those insulated devices. But again, you can see that they're trying to separate to protect them. This facility here that I went to actually put all the instruments back after the point of use, and actually wiped everything down and did what they needed to do. But that was nice because it separated metal instruments to possibly breaking those insulated devices. Proper setup of those devices after testing. So now we're on the clean side, and here just showing a nice rack. What I do see is smaller surgery centers and smaller hospitals are mixing the insulated devices with metal instrumentation, and so that's where I'm seeing a lot of that damage, is when you're combining the tray or you're not having a separation like a rack. So here's some causes. Now these are very dramatic. Not only was there causes with damage with the laparoscopic in this case, but the camera, the lens, every which way. So again, this is bad, very, very bad. This one here, they just separated by putting the ones they used on top, which you know that in transport can fall over, and it's almost like pickup sticks. So this is another area that could be damage to those devices. This is actually the separation and decontam and actually going through the washer disinfector, and you can see the insulation is just being scraped by that metal. So another example of a not good way to set that up. And this is actually an out view of that, and you can see the scissors and everything are open. That's great, but again, that's areas where it can cut those insulated devices. And again, a close-up of that. So real quickly, outpatient surgery actually came out with this piece here. This is complications of the internal births can put patients in life-threatening condition, and it goes on to say that basically can have a big impact on patient outcomes. Here it says that stray electrical injury occurs outside the field of view. Again, we stress that about you're not really going to know if that happens. And here's a good video that will show what happens here. And this is fine. This is exactly where the target tissue is. And this is what you see in the video in the room. But when you actually go out, you can see this other burn to an untarget tissue. And you may not see that during the case. So here, I went and looked up a lot of different, like, medical malpractice or lawsuits that are happening. And this was just one of many, so I only picked a few. But this one actually happened to be a nurse who suffered complications. And here, obviously, money is a factor that puts a hit on the facility. But really, it's about the patient and the stuff that they're going to have to go through. So again, it's just an example of one that took place. Here was another one that says the first few days, so during the first few days, however, basically having that recovery, that 3 to 7 days after that will have complications of fever, nausea, and vomiting. And then they'll usually come in for exploratory lab and later find out that was actually adhesions during that first procedure. This one here was a Da Vinci. I was surprised when I found this one, but the patient actually died and died of small bowel injuries, claiming that the robotics equipment lacked sufficient insulation. And also a study in 2011 showing that some forms of insulation failed on the Da Vinci robot as much as 4 times the rate of conventional surgical equipment. It went and later on to say that a cancer center reported 3 cases of artery burns resulting from poor insulation on the robot. So again, that was a lot of information to absorb. I'm going to pass this section on to Seth Hendy to go over the last remaining CHIP tips.
Thank you, Sharon. That that video of the burn always gets me. When you pull out, that one really brings it home that it's something that you just can't see all the time. And if you're not looking, if you're not doing the testing ahead of time, really bad things can happen. Okay. Well, so again, my name is Seth Hendy, and I'm going to start with a few CHIP tips of my own. Wait for Sharon to give me control here.
All right, Seth, you got it.
Here we go. Okay. So CHIP tip number 5, do I really need to test my heat sealer? We consider these such a simple item sometimes that they get overlooked. And there's a few things in the department that are thought of like that. I think back to Sharon talking about the insulation tester. Some of these items are so simple and we just expect them to work, but heat sealers do fail. And since this is a critical piece of equipment that is providing a sterile barrier, it is really something that we should have some performance qualification on. And that's a big thing now. ST90, I believe, is a document that you're going to start hearing more and more about. And it starts to talk about IQ, OQ, PQ, and making sure that this machine functions as it was intended and provides the seal that it should, is part of that performance qualification. And you can already see that AAMI has a TIR, which is a guidance document that talks about it. ISO has a standard as well. And then it is something the Joint Commission can look at. And this is really the reason why. On the left here, you see an air bubble. So that is a heat seal not done well, either with poor contact or with not the right temperature. And on the right-hand side, we see one that is just entirely too high. And now that is starting to melt the item. It could be that this was set for a regular peel pouch and they were attempting to do Tyvek. And so that is also a thought. Your high temp and your low temp peel packs oftentimes are at different temperature settings. So here's a poll question. How many of you perform some sort of verification test on your heat sealer?
Okay, we'll just give it a few seconds, Seth, for people to vote, and then I will close the poll. Okay, I'm now closing the poll, Seth. So you have 22% said yes and 78% said no.
We find that a lot, and that's because, again, they're just thought to be a simple machine that should work. Well, these next couple of slides here will kind of give you a reason why. Many people actually look at their heat sealer and don't even know that there's an adjustment knob. This screen on the inside is meant to be turned, and as you can see here, it was used too hot and over again. Even when it was turned, it was used too many times and too hot in the same place. And this is what we see. These are the burns we get. That is not going to seal the peel pack in the way that it should. And so that's why it's taking on much more importance, these simpler things. I love when someone can come up with something that takes something that could be considered subjective and make it objective. And I love this seal integrity test because it can actually test the lot number of a set of peel packs, checking the seal made by the manufacturer. Then it can test the seal itself created by the peel pack machine. And it can be used as a competency device as well. You could have people seal this in and see how well they're doing that. And this is just a great, quick, easy visual way to do that. Tip number 6, why and how do I inspect fiber optic cables or endoscopes? It's another very important thing that is oftentimes missed. We think and we hope that these just work, but optical cables and endoscopes must be checked for fiber breakage by holding the distal end against the light source and looking into the cable at the other end. A lot of times it can be just held up to the light. I do not suggest plugging it into a light source because those actually produce quite a bit of light and you really don't need that much. So just holding it up to the light over your workstation can actually produce enough to look through and look for broken fibers. And fiber breakage is indicated by little black spots as you look through. If more than 30% of the fibers are broken, the light put at the distal end is no longer adequate. And if this is the case, the cable should be returned and repaired or replaced. Really what it causes the surgeon to do, what it causes the staff in the room to do is just crank that light source way, way up to try to compensate for the broken fibers. And that's really not what we want. So that's a quick and simple thing to do to make sure they're getting what they need. Tip number 7 is cleaning verification. And what is cleaning verification? Cleaning verification in its closest or in its simplest form is visual. We're all doing that already. We're actually taking instruments, holding them in front of our eyes, and looking for the debris that we can see. But, debris getting down to, say, 0.1 microgram and in specific spots like the channels of endoscopes becomes very, very hard to see, if not impossible to see, with the naked eye. So now there are tools out there that actually allow us to take that cleaning verification beyond. Your tools to start is enhancing your visualization with magnification. So that's still working in the visual, but taking it to the next level, 2 times, 4 times magnification. And then we can get into chemical tests that start to look for specific markers. And some commercially available tests are either flush or swab methods. And you should be looking for clinically relevant soils like carbohydrates, proteins, hemoglobin, and then of course ATP. Number 8, ultrasonics. This is a little pet peeve of mine because it's such a complex device and it's performing such a specific job, yet it can again be thought of as a simple thing. And if you hear the buzz, this machine must be working. And the sad part is that's really not true. Even if it's producing cavitation, it may not be producing enough for it to be working properly. So what is cavitation? Ultrasonic cleaners work by subjecting instruments to high frequency, high energy sound waves, and that causes the soil to dislodge. There's little implosions that happen, and that actually pulls soil away from the instrument. And as those air bubbles implode, as the cavitation occurs. Ultrasonic vibration at the frequency used for cleaning doesn't kill microorganisms, and infectious aerosols may be produced. So that is the reason that the lid should stay closed. In many automated machines, the lid closes automatically. So that is another little bit of a caveat. It's hard to tell what is going on inside these machines when the lids are always closed. So being able to put a test in the machine, have it run, and then get a result is very important. As you can see here, you can have a variation of cavitation. So on the left-hand side of this picture, cavitation did occur. Those tests did change. You got a very mild, if at all, change to the middle, and none on the right-hand side at all. And that is because of this picture. Now, it would have to be flipped over to be representative, but when you see on the right-hand side the transducers attached, that is why the tests on the left side of the previous picture have changed color. And as we go over here, with the transducers disconnected, no cavitation is being produced on that side of the machine, and those tests failed. Yet, it was making a lovely humming sound when we took this picture. So that can't be the way that we decide that something is working. Chip tip number 9, why must I clean my screens of my washers? Daily maintenance just cannot be overstated. It's there for a reason. It keeps the machine running well, and it produces better outcomes. When that machine is doing what it should be doing, you have better instruments produced on the other side. Especially the image on the left here rings true in a couple of ways. That screen obviously has not been changed or has not been checked probably for several days now with the amount of debris in it. But what is also very interesting is the pulley directly above that is supposed to have a metal cable wrapped around it that actually causes the spray arm to move up and down. And you can see at the very bottom of the pulley, it's frayed and broken. So that spray arm has not been moving up and down. And so adequate cleaning has not been happening. And if you were doing your daily maintenance and inspections of this machine, both of those things would have been noticed, that the clogged screens and the broken spray arm cable. Chip tip number 10, do I have to test my washer every day? It becomes such a hassle when my tests fail to call maintenance and have it documented. Daily testing is recommended, especially in ST79. The pieces of equipment that we're using are very crucial to producing acceptable patient care equipment, right? To producing clean equipment for the staff to check and then sterilize. We know that you cannot, there's no such thing as sterile dirt. That doesn't exist. So adequately removing, knowing that my machine is adequately removing soil is very important. And as you can see, it shows up in section 2, in section 7, 13, and 2 annexes of ST79, really talking about just how important testing of your equipment is. Here is a good example of why to test, and this also relates back. That's actually blue wrap right there in the picture on the left. Things get shredded as they go through that screen, and then they come into the spray arm. And as those spray arms get clogged, they're going to not perform properly, and they're going to start failing tests. And I want you to take a look as this video starts of the middle spray arm just above the arrow. Now, it's hard to see the other ones because they're actually traveling so fast because that's the speed they're supposed to be going at. And that middle spray arm is clogged, and that is what is causing it to move across the frame at a snail's pace. And so when your spray arms get clogged, they're not producing the same effect that they should throughout your cycle. 3 important documents really call out and support verification of your medical cleaning equipment. I also like that term too, medical cleaning equipment. Sharon and I, we get questions sometimes. I don't see something specific about ultrasonics. You can usually find those in the recommendations, in the annexes and things like that, where it's easier to produce lists of things to test. But what should really be understood here is that medical cleaning equipment covers sonics, cart washers, mechanical instrument washers, and it's easier to list them that way because it really does cover all of them. And so keeping all of those things in mind, the Joint Commission EC 62, that's medical equipment, should be tested. Again, ST 79, Section 7 heavily speaks to that. And then, as I mentioned before, ST 90 is a quality document, quality management systems. And of course, testing to make sure that your equipment is working properly is going to add quality to your department and quality to your process. And they all support the same concept. Medical cleaning equipment should be tested daily. Preventative maintenance must be done and documented. And independent testing and verification of the process is key to reducing dirty surgical instruments and hospital infections. This is just a little thought about what a surrogate device would be. Instruments, especially hinged instruments with box locks, become soiled with blood. The blood, as much as we talk about maintaining moisture, sometimes does begin to dry and to harden, and getting into those specific areas becomes difficult. And if you have a test that simulates that same sort of action, then you're much more assured of your outcomes. Just some other things found in a washer and other reasons that your washer can fail. Needle found in a washer, that's not very good sharp safety. But as you can see, broken O-rings, tip protectors, all of those things that are going to impact the action and the impingement action and the function of your washer. And of course, tests fail when these things are present. Tip number 11, is it okay to have a wire stainless steel or a brass brush in the decontamination area? And the question is really that depends. Some IFUs do state it, and that is a good thought to have. If I'm told not to, if you were dealing with laparoscopic instruments, as Sharon was talking about, with very fragile coating, the IFU is not going to prescribe that. It's going to tell you to try to do things to minimize damage to that. But there are some very durable pieces of medical equipment that sometimes do need and can use a brush. So AAMI ST 79 states, use brushes and other cleaning implements intended for use on medical devices. Brushes should be checked for visible soil and damage following each use and should be frequently cleaned and disinfected. If the manufacturer specifies a specific brush or cleaning instrument, the brush or an equivalent should be used. So, as you see, this Escalap, that's an interesting little brush, but that Escalap IFU actually calls out a specific little metal cleaning brush. So thus, on a stainless steel brushes, the design usage of this stainless steel brush pictured is mostly for bone files and other orthopedic instruments to help remove cement. So if the IFCU states you can use a metal brush, then make sure your policy reflects its use and only on those items. So it's taboo. It seems to be taboo sometimes, but there are applications for it. Just make sure you're staying within your instructions for use. Here's another one. Here's another one that draws a lot of attention, but does still have support and recommendations if done properly. And that is really, really the issue here. Banding tape becomes so prevalent sometimes and is on so many things that maintenance of it really becomes the issue. But you can use banding tape if done properly. It is designed to help organize and track instruments as they move between sterile processing and their various customers. In some support from SD79, instrument tape and plastic dipping material, when used properly, are ways of identifying specific instruments. These types of marking products wear out over time, and staff need to inspect them each time the instrument is processed. And there we go, because they can be damaged in the first use. And when you're doing that, you're checking them for wear according to the IFU of the product used and replacing them as needed. And that gets very specific. Even application has to be per the IFU. So you're not just checking it. I can tell you, I've not seen a banding tape manufacturer that says 5 times around. That's not going to be in their IFU. And that is where banding tape becomes an issue because it can harbor debris. They're also not going to allow it to become chipped, broken, or to start to have the adhesive come out from the top or the bottom, because those, again, are a place that is going to harbor debris, and that is when the tape would need to be changed. And if it's not, that's when issues occur. Here is another poll question. How many of you have a system in place to replace damaged color coding in facilities by repair vendors or an in-house program?
Okay, Seth, let's see. We got 73% said yes and 27% said no.
That's not bad. That's good. If you're going to use it, that's what you need, right? That's what we need to hear, is that it is getting done. KeyDot is the same thing. This is just a really interesting little system that can be read with a specific barcode scanner. Maintenance. It is all about maintenance with these, because as soon as they aren't, that becomes a liability for your instruments. AST does also support taping. Manufacturer's instructions, healthcare policies should be followed for the use of colored tape and plastic dipping materials for identification of specific surgical instruments. Studies have confirmed that the use of colored tape does not interfere with sterilizing agents contacting the underlying surface, again, if used properly. And here is just a big time example of layered on top of each other, which is usually not indicated, not connecting, which is usually not indicated, and having adhesive leaking out the top. So this is 3 strikes in one image. Number 13, do I have to worry about the temperature in my washer? Yes, you do. Washers specifically have ups and downs in temperature to do certain things. Pre-rinses should be cooler than washing. Thermal disinfection, of course, has to be at specific temperatures. So here you can see there are ways to gather this data, and you can see sometimes that enzyme rinses become too high, and enzymes can actually be killed by that being too high. Pre-rinses can be too short, and detergent cycle is a little too low in this graph. And to finish out the cycle here, this is too low on the dry phase. And this could be because of chambers or issues like that, but you're going to end up with wet instruments for that. Okay, another poll question. How many of you use some sort of verification test to test temperature on your cleaning equipment? Sorry, I didn't finish that.
Okay, I'm just closing the poll. You have 66% said yes and 34% said no.
It's something to look at. It helps you. I'm going to flip through a couple of these slides because there's so many. We couldn't help put these pictures in. So some of these are repeats, so I'm just going to kind of jump. This is my last tip. What about eye wash stations? There is guidance for eye wash stations, SC79, ANSI, Z358, and then OSHA. And OSHA is the big one. Emergency eye wash stations should be within 10 seconds of travel time, maintained per the IFU, and testing should be documented. Here's an example of an eye wash station on a decontaminated sink. It does require weekly activation, and it should be with tepid water so that there's not worse complications from burns than it can be used. OSHA is the big one because of this. OSHA requirements for emergency eye wash stations are found in 29 CFR. The reason that this is such a big deal is because OSHA, unlike other entities that we talk about, AAMI and things like that, can actually levy fines. There's legal implications with OSHA, and here you can see $100,000 and can exceed $1 million fine should those have a problem. How many of you perform weekly verification tests on your eye wash stations?
Okay, I'm going to close it now, Seth, and you have got 86% said yes and 14% said no.
Very good. The more, the better with that. And these, I just want you to look at some. I would not put my face up against this, or this, or this. Now, the left one especially is not so much that it's dirty, but does that look unobstructed to you? I don't think so. And then last but not least here, this is something that looks clean, but with the cap missing and with no data written down to show that it was tested. That's still an issue. It is not acceptable anymore to have drenching things. It must be piped in. So you have to have a plumbed system like this. So sterile processing department is a detailed and dynamic arena. The sterile processing professional today has to be knowledgeable, motivated, and innovative. Certification and continuing education is key to strive in this environment. And just a couple of quick things. We've got games that we love people to play that come with free CEUs and expand your knowledge. And we're huge supporters of SPD, and for several years now have been doing the Decontaminator of the Year award at ISHM, and it is always great to support that.
Okay, that's great, Seth. We are running out of time, but we can do 2 quick questions. You talk about different accessories that come with your tester. What if you only have 1 or 2 accessories to test the wide range of instruments that we carry?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. I do see that across the country. You want to reach out to the vendor of your tester and see if did you receive them all to begin with, because I do find that where they've ordered it and it didn't come in correctly. Also, ask if they have new accessories that have to be purchased separately, as well as if that's all you got, then I'd probably shop around and look at one that meets your inventory for instrumentation device needs. So.
That's great. One more. It says AAMI and ANSI make recommendation about eye wash safety. Why is OSHA the one that finds places?
That's a good question. It's the difference between a voluntary and a regulatory body. And so voluntary organizations make recommendations, and regulatory make regulations. And that is really, I know it's a little semantical with the words, but that's the difference. A lot of government agencies can come in and can impose legal ramifications where ANSI and AAMI can't do that.
Okay, that's great. Well, we are actually out of time, but I have received a lot of questions, so I will be submitting them to Sharon and Seth after the webinar to answer them offline, so they will contact you directly with your answers. So thank you once again for a great and informative webinar, Sharon and Seth, and obviously thank you again to our sponsor, HealthSmart Industries. Just a very quick reminder that the post-webinar survey and certificate process are now automated, so the survey link will be included in the follow-up email, which you'll receive in about an hour's time now. Once you've completed the survey, you'll be able to download your certificate immediately, and one lucky attendee will win an Amazon gift card for completing the survey. Details regarding the eShim and CBSBP credit link will be sent out in a separate email by HealthMart. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. And for more information on our upcoming OR Today webinars, please visit our website, ortoday.com. Thank you so much for giving up your time this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you next time.